Okay, let's go for it.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's session with Drew Sinko. He is a senior sales engineer and has over 30 plus years experience in tech and business. He will be speaking with us about asset management and what the past and the future can teach to us. He is going to run through his presentation, and then he's going to do a demo for us. And then after that, we will open up the conversation for questions.
Am I on?
You are on. You go right ahead, sir.
Thank you for that and welcome. As Allison said, my name is Drew. I'm happy to be here. I work for Axonius, which is a company that is helping customers solve asset management, but for cybersecurity purposes. And that really is the key here. So given that today's topic is about discussing top trends taking place now and in the future, and how professionals will utilize technology, process, and leadership to gain a competitive advantage, thought I'd take a look at how you can get ready for the future of cybersecurity by addressing your asset management challenges today. So here's what I'm going to go over. First, we'll look at the present asset management challenge for cybersecurity. Then we'll take a look back and see why we're still struggling with getting a straight answer around assets. Then we'll look at where we're headed in the future. And finally, I'm going to wrap it all up with the Axonius approach and how we can help. So here's a scenario I want to talk about. This is a hypothetical situation, okay? But if a CISO asks their team, how many Windows hosts do we have? How many, it doesn't have to be Windows, could be anything, but it should go without saying that they're looking for one answer, right? Now, I talk about this with a lot of customers and across all sorts of verticals, pretty much every vertical. And everyone seems to identify with this situation that I'm not going to get a single answer. And if I do, it's only some sort of an estimate. So each team member that you query, that you ask, they have some bread and butter tool that they go to for their answer. And the numbers are different, right? We see the SIM team has one answer, CMDB has an answer, desktops has an answer, and they're just all over the place. And so these numbers are different. It's a real challenge just to get to that answer that we want. Some of the people that I've talked to have given up trying to achieve a single number, and they just settle for a range or a ballpark figure. But here's my question to you in the audience. Can you confidently say you're securing your assets based on a ballpark figure on how many assets you have? Or let's put it this way. If the board of directors asked you this question, are you really going to go back to them with 5 answers? I mean, I would not want to be in that position. And so I'm left wondering, has knowing what we have become an impossible task? So I think this tweet is revealing. What it's showing me is we're struggling at times with relatively simple questions, things that we should be able to answer. And if we struggle with the simple ones, how are we going to succeed with complex questions that I know are coming? So this organization, this hypothetical organization, like many others, probably like the one you're with right now, have a variety of tools deployed. I would say this organization has an enviable set of tools. Yeah, just these, and this is probably not everything. There's probably more tools out there. There's no lack of tools to help them do things, but each tool, built for a purpose, has some asset information. No single tool has the complete picture here. So what the CISO really wants is a single answer, which leverages the combined knowledge of everything that all of their tools know about. That would have very high value to the organization if he could get that. So what I'm saying is, in this environment, they're not suffering from a lack of data. They have the data. They got plenty of data about which assets they have. The problem is it's in the desktop tool, the EDR tool, the CMDB, the SIM. So it's in these different tools, and that makes getting answers to the question like this a challenge. So the same CISO is likely wondering, if I don't know how many assets I have, how can I know if my agent is everywhere it should be? And it's a question that can't be answered just by asking the endpoint management console. I can't say, hey, CrowdStrike, tell me where you are not installed. Agent-based technologies alone can't really do that. That's not how they work. Instead, you'd have to be able to ask multiple different sources and correlate that data together. So looking at AD and maybe some scanner data, this, that, but correlating that data together is the big challenge, right? It's really difficult to take data sets in different formats, different notions of what makes a unique record. Should we focus on the IP address? That works in some cases, but not other tools. MAC address, some tools use it, some don't. Host name, some use it, some don't. And some tools are deriving their own unique identifier. They assign an ID every time you add a new asset, and it only makes sense within that tool. So this correlation thing, that's a big part of the challenge. But if you could do that, if you could compare these different data sets, then you could make some inferences, and then you could start to answer questions like this one. So our CISO is also going to be challenged to identify unmanaged devices connected to privileged networks. Now, when I say privileged, I just mean internal corporate networks. I don't mean, government classifications and secret, top secret, not that kind of thing, though you could take it that way. But what I'm getting at is, to me, a guest Wi-Fi network is not a privileged network. I'm not really ever going to look for things that are on the guest network that don't have CrowdStrike, because they may not even belong to us. So it's not a fruitful effort. But anyway, to answer this question, you really need to collect data, again, from multiple systems in order to make this determination. And again, the correlation is going to be the challenge which determines the success or failure of your efforts. And as one last example, our CISO is worried about, are my cloud instances covered? We're moving more and more of our computing to the cloud, but the security solutions we use on premise don't necessarily work the same way in these dynamic workloads. For example, does my vulnerability scanner know about all of my AWS instances? I can't really ask Rapid7 or Tenable or Qualys to tell me, hey, which of these VMs are you not scanning? They don't know. That's not how they work. What they know is which subnets they've been configured to scan. So then the question really becomes, why is asset management so difficult? And now we're going back to the past a bit, but it's 2020, and with all the great security tools we have, you'd think we would have solved this by now. But if we looked at this in context and how we got here, I think we can make it clear how we got here from the past and why asset management is such a challenge. So if I go back 20 years, businesses generally looked like this. You had Windows systems. They were on physical networks, hardwired, managed by Active Directory, probably protected by an AV client, and had something to push out updates. Life was easy, very simple, at least compared to today. And everything on the network was sort of a known asset. Now what happened? We started to see new devices show up. I've got, Macintosh and VMs and Linux. And as we pushed these tools out, well, we had to, or these types of devices, we had to get new tools to help manage and secure those things. Then the next wave came in was mobile devices and smartphones. And there was even a split there between Android and iOS. And that meant more management and security tools. Then came the cloud. And you probably remember, we all feared the cloud. Well, I don't know if we all did, but certainly there was a reluctance to go to the cloud. And now it just seems to be pretty much par for the course. But that meant yet more tools. And today we talk about IoT and things delivered as a service. So when you look at the evolution and the whole picture here, you can see that the more devices and device types that we introduced, the more solutions we had to implement. And to my point earlier, they all know a piece of the puzzle, but all these different silos made it hard to ask questions, get answers, and take action. Now, I'm going to ask anybody in the audience, everybody, to get the chat function up. And I just want to ask you this one question. Just give me a number. How many tools do you think your organization currently has today to manage your needs? And you can, think of things that are on this list or not on this list on the screen. But, I'm curious where the numbers come in. I just want to talk about them a little bit. So somebody wrote, well, that's a high number, 150. I'll tell you what I see a lot of times with my customers. It's 10, 20, somewhere in that range, 15, whatever. And so if you have this many tools, and think about it, Active Directory, SCCM, some sort of vulnerability scanner, at least one agent. You might be lucky if you only have one agent. Multiple agents seem to be common. You got your network gear. You got your identity management solutions like Okta. There's probably cloud involved. So we get to 5 or 8 or 10 pretty quickly. That is the scale of your correlation challenge. Remember, I keep telling you, correlation is going to be the real hard challenge in all of this. If you've got even 3 tools, correlation is difficult because regardless of the number of tools, how would you do this today? You could try to dump all your data into a spreadsheet, but now you've got to figure out which of these are the same records because you're going to have duplicates and missing data and gaps and things. That's really going to make that a challenge. So what this boils down to is this: the future of cybersecurity means more chaos. And I mean that in the sense that chaos is the opposite of order. So more assets, more asset types, more employees bringing more devices and more solutions needed to secure them. And that is sort of the definition of complexity. And with more complexity comes more uncertainty. You know, this in some ways, if you watched the keynote this morning, reminds me back of Ryan Lynn, because he was talking about uncertainty and you know, pushing yourself in new directions or whatever. Anyway, with uncertainty, do we know how many devices we have? That's been the question all along. Are our security solutions properly deployed and up to date? And are our security controls working? This is definitely a question I know, you know, security executives care about. It's one thing to buy the solutions. It's another to know that they're properly deployed. Okay, so, you know, future trends, things are not going to get any less complex, not anytime soon, and probably not ever. So let's talk about the future and asset trends. We have more connected devices than ever before. The number and type of devices that companies are responsible for are just exploding. Cisco Internet Business Solutions Group made a prediction back in 2011. So now that's our link to the past. And they said that in 2020, which is where we are now, there would be 50 billion devices connected to the internet. And so if you take that number and divide it by the population of the planet, to me, it comes in around 7 connected devices per person, depending on the numbers you use. So that's where we got to that. So, okay, in 2011, they said it's about 7 devices per person. Now, when I first heard this, I kind of didn't believe it. And I said, it seems overblown to me. I'm not carrying 6 things around with me. But again, I'd like to ask the audience, if you're willing to participate, go into the chat function and give me 2 numbers. The first number is how many people are in your household. And the second number is how many things are on your home network. And I'm going to tell you my story now as we see the data trickle in. But so like I said, this didn't make sense to me. In my household, we've got 4 people. And so the first thought I had was, well, we're way under 7 devices per person. I've got a couple of laptops and a couple of phones. Like, I'm not even a gambler, but I kind of would have bet that we're not going to get close to the numbers they're talking about. Well, I looked at my network gear and the number of clients that it knew about, and the number edged over 30. It was around 32. In fact, I checked this morning for this talk, and in the last 30 days, it knew about 36 different things. And I still didn't believe it. You know, the thing's not going to lie, but it didn't make sense. So I started looking at the list. There's the laptops, there's the phones. Oh yeah, iPads, of course. Some people in the house have iPads. There's old iPads because we replace them every couple of years, but I've at least repurposed one in the kitchen where all I do is use it to look at recipes, but it's still there. And then, oh yeah, well, there's a printer. Well, that goes without saying. That should make sense. And I keep looking at the list, and things are just coming out of the woodwork. Apple TV. Well, yeah, of course we have an Apple TV, and we use it. Amazon Fire Stick. They were on sale. There's 2 of those. Sonos speakers. Yep, I use those every day. Don't even think about them. They're there, but they're on the network. And so one after another, you know, Nintendo game console. And I'm a little bit sad to say there's an Amazon Alexa in the house, and I think there's a Google Home also. And I'm not even getting to the really popular IoT things like the Ring doorbell and the Nest thermostat. We don't have some of those things, but one after another, lo and behold, we're at about 8 devices per person. So Looking at the answers that came in, I see somebody that's in a household of one person with 10 devices. And I've seen other people are saying 3 and 25 and some of these different numbers. So if you don't know how many devices are on your network, I suggest you take a look. It might be eye-opening. It certainly was for me. Now, that's home devices. It's not corporate. I get it. But I think it was a fun exercise, and it speaks to the point of more connected devices. So, and as the number of connected devices continues to rise, as I've been saying, so will the number of solutions that you need to buy to manage them. There was a study done by 451 Research called The Voice of the Enterprise, and they reported that 87% of enterprises expect to spend more on information security. That shouldn't be a surprise. It's good news, actually. Oftentimes the news is we don't have enough, and probably the news is still we don't have enough, but at least we're going to get more, or there's the expectation to spend more. Now, wrong way. On top of all this, though, you are going to face a lack of dedicated resources. So with the number and complexity of information security projects to tackle, companies simply don't have the full-time employees to spare to dedicate to managing all of these security solutions and devices we're talking about. I think that's been a trend for years, is there's just not enough people in information security. So that 451 Research study also said that 2/3 of enterprises say they don't have enough information personnel. So, the message, if you put these things together, is we're going to buy more tools that have to be managed by somebody, but we're not going to add more people. That's the lack of resource that I think is most concerning. And so take the workload you have today, everything you have to do, all the tools you already have to manage and use, and just know we're going to add some more on top of that, but not give you any human help with that. I think that's a bit of a problem. And I think everybody's trying to get to this point of we need to do more with either the same people that we have now or fewer. And how can we do more work with fewer people? And is adding tools going to make things seem like less work or more work? Every tool out there has a demand. There's a learning curve to get into it. There's the periodic usage or maintenance. Sometimes this is daily. So it's something to consider, and maybe a cause for concern for anybody that's having to live in this kind of environment. So that brings me to this point, and that is, what does it truly take to build an asset inventory? Has anyone tried? Have you tried? To that talking point, a company called ESG conducted a survey. They talked to 200 companies that had over 1,000 employees each and asked them that question. Did you build an asset inventory, and what did it take to get there? And then they summarized the results. And then the numbers shake out like this. So on average, across all those 200 companies, on average, it took 89 person hours of labor for the organization to get this project done. To have any real relevant value, they had to do it on average 19 times per year, or let's say once every 3 weeks. Like, think about it. Your inventory is not a static thing. If you get it, your environment's not static. So your inventory is not going to be, and it needs to be updated. And you need to do this 19 times a year. And it's going to involve multiple teams of people. So that's just to get a basic inventory. That's just to get to the point of saying we've counted everything that we can, and we can give basic statistics and metric feedback on what we have, having nothing to do with cybersecurity or identifying the gaps where things belong but are not there. So what this all boils down to is that complexity within cybersecurity is inevitable. There's no point in trying to stop it. So how do we work with it? How do we ensure we know what we have? And I'm going to show you the Axonius approach. Axonius connects to the security and management tools that our customers already have using what we call adapters. Now, adapters are just our lingo for the integration. It's an API connection that lets Axonius collect and aggregate the information about assets. Now, keep in mind, I'm collecting asset information. This is not log or event information. I'm not trying to, look for intrusion attempts. What I'm trying to do is build an asset inventory. Now, we currently have over 270 of these adapters. That's 270 different technologies out there that we partner with today or work with, and we're always adding more. This approach means that Axonius never has to deploy agents or scanners. We don't need a span port or a tap. We could run in an air-gapped network. We don't even need internet access, to tell you the truth. But instead of using, having to deploy anything, relying on your existing tools and the data they've already collected, we pull that information from those management consoles together and use that. Remember, our opening CISO did not suffer from a lack of data, right? He had plenty of tools and he had plenty of asset data. What he didn't have was something that brought it together to make it useful to him. So once a customer is connected to our adapters, the Axonius is able to give them really three things. The first is this credible and comprehensive, always up-to-date asset inventory. Every laptop, desktop, VM server, IoT device, cloud instances, networking gear. If it's known to something on the network and we're drawing from that management tool, we're going to know about it too. And we're not adding a burden on the network or the devices because we're not reaching out and touching those end devices. We're aggregating the data, which you've already collected in your existing tools. So secondly, the thing we're going to provide is with the full asset inventory, customers can now use this query wizard that we've provided to discover security coverage gaps. The kind of things that I hit on with those questions earlier with the CISO. Show me any machine that is missing my agent. Show me which unmanaged devices have appeared on the privileged network. Show me which instances in the cloud or on-prem are not being scanned by the vulnerability scanner. These kinds of questions become, dare I say, trivial to answer within Axonius. And every query in Axonius can be saved, and then we can use saved queries to automate the action that we want to take on the resulting data set. Finally, the third thing is customers are able to use the Axonius Enforcement Center to decide what action to take. So this is a form of automation, right? Look for these things, the ones you found, here's your choice of actions. And the actions start from notifications by email, Slack, syslog, you name it, to creating incidents in a ticketing system, enriching data from third-party data sources, updating vulnerability scans for systems that are not there. There's quite a good long list of that, and I'll be able to show that in the platform. But the idea here is to let the customer decide what level of automation and what action they want to take, whatever makes sense for them. Let's see. I've got a couple of sort of success story case studies that I'll run through quickly because I really want to get to the demo. I think that's going to be where you get the most impact. So in this particular case with AppsFlyer, they had a new CISO, and that person chose a series of what they consider best-in-class security tools, which is great. His challenge was, how can I prove that I've deployed this to all of my assets, that everything's covered and the way we want it done? And the feedback was with Axonius, he was able to demonstrate that his team has deployed the tools across all their assets. And he had some, nice things to say here about how easy it was to deploy and how responsive our team was. This next customer at Landmark Health was challenged with recurring audits and maintaining compliance. With Axonius, they were able to compose queries to search for the kinds of things that the auditors would care about. And then they were able to use that automation feature to automate the task of searching for those gaps and notifying their team to take action. And so the result was, instead of stressing about the audit that they knew was coming every 3 months, the team was notified daily of any gaps that were discovered. They were addressed quickly so that the audit process was no longer something to fear. And in his words, there has never been a tool that does what Axonius does. This customer, Extreme Engineering, was challenged due to the fact that they had multiple data sources and most of their work was a manual effort. So they were trying to do it, spreadsheets or whatever. And the job had simply become too big for that sort of strategy. It's kind of what I alluded to earlier. You can try and dump all your data to spreadsheets or CSV files and bring it together in Excel. but that's not going to solve the correlation problem. So with Axonius, the job of tracking assets and security gaps was no longer a manual process. The visibility and ease of use changed everything. And in the end, they said they saw Axonius as the only real tool for the job. Okay, here's a list of some use cases. I think I've already talked through some of these. I'd rather move forward. I don't really need to harp on this. So let's go to the demo. And Allison, if you want to open up the audio, I don't mind if people ask questions as I go forward, but I've got a definite sort of talk track that I have in mind.
Sounds great. I will go ahead and open up the audio. I just ask that everybody leave themselves on mute until you're ready to actually speak and add to the conversation.
Okay. And Allison, you can still see my screen, right?
Yes, sir.
Perfect.
I can see you.
Okay, so let's start with that tweet slide. How many Windows hosts do I have? I'm gonna answer that real quick. You're gonna see how easy it is, and then I'm gonna come back and show you how we got here. I'm gonna go to my devices page where I'm not reset. Let me reset this. Okay, right here. Pay attention. This is like the man behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. This little piece of the screen is where we're gonna get, come back to again and again. I've got 40,363 devices in my inventory that we've built. We'll tell you how we built that in a moment. But to answer the question, here's what an Axonius customer would do. They'd open the query wizard. And since the question is Windows hosts, I'm going to say, show me anything where the OS type equals Windows. And boom, just like that, I get my answer. It's 22,300 of those 40,000 devices were Windows based. I can see my OS over here. It's this column of OS type, which is what I used in the query. I even have other OS information. I've actually got a lot of information. We're really just getting started. But this couldn't have been easier, right? I didn't have to know programming languages. I didn't have to know Python or regular expressions or anything. This was just drop downs, look for a field and look for the existence of certain values. So what does it take to get to this level of ease with Axonius? For that, I'm going to go back to that term I use called adapters. These are those integrations we have. This is that list that's over 270. It's probably over 280 today of different technologies. So things like Microsoft tools, Active Directory's in here, Azure, SCCM, okay, a bunch of these things. Another big pocket is Cisco-based devices. So I've got all kinds of different Cisco tools that I can integrate with today right out of the box. All of your agent-based technologies. So I mentioned CrowdStrike, but I could go on for quite a while on Cylance, McAfee, Symantec, Sophos, SentinelOne, Manage Engine. I mean, there's just McAfee EPO and on and on. All my various vulnerability scanners, right? There's various Tenable products from Nessus to Tenable.io to Tenable SC. Qualys is in here, Rapid7. All of our cloud-based things, right? Amazon, Azure, Google Cloud Platform. So the point here is connect out of the box. Axonius can connect to probably all, if not all of the tools you have. And if you have a tool that we don't have, we will build the adapter for you. Okay, and that at no additional cost. So the reason our library of adapters is so large is because we build them to customer demand. Now, when it comes to connecting one of these, that's fairly straightforward too. So customer gets Axonius. We deliver a VM. You choose where to put it. It can go on-prem, it can go in your cloud, but it's really staying on your network because that's an important thing, right? It's your data. You want to keep it with you and within your network walls. So when you choose a tool, and I chose Alert Logic, you say add a connection, and this really only needs two basic pieces of information. Where is that tool? This is going to be a host name or an IP address or URL. And then what are the credentials that tool requires? This one wants an API key. And once I give it that, as long as I don't have proxies in the way, I can then save and fetch data from that tool. This is going to put this fetch on a cycle. We call it the discovery cycle, and it defaults to every 12 hours. So twice a day, we're going to reach out to this tool, get copies of those records, and bring them into Axonius. I don't need to change anything on the source. I largely just need read-only access. So the source won't look any different after we do this. And then the last thing the adapter is responsible for is sort of normalizing the data, or we might say adapting it, so that we can now compare Alert Logic's data to the stuff that we get from all of our other tools. So back here on the dashboard, I want to focus on this first column called device discovery. What this is showing me is the list of tools that I've connected to. And for each one, I can roll over it and see the name of the tool and how many records we have fetched from that tool. When you see two numbers, what that means is the high number in parentheses is the total number of records that we received from that tool, in this case, from McAfee EPO. And then Axonius examined the data and said, within that number, there's only this many unique assets, and that's what we're focusing on is assets. So it has deduplicated the data that we got from the source. Then at the bottom here, what we see is just a summary of how we got here. We started from 222,000 records. We got that from 11 different source tools. After that in-tool deduplication, that dropped it to 200,000. And then after correlation across all of those tools, so bringing the 11 data sets together, we landed right here at where I started the demo, which was 40,363 unique devices. And that is the heavy lift here. That's the correlation that I've been telling you is really, really hard to get to and figure out. And Axonius does this for you right out of the box. What did you do? You brought up the VM, you connected to adapters by giving it, credentials. Axonius did all of this without any other effort. Now you can really start to do some great stuff. If we go back to the devices page, this might make a little more sense now. Every row here represents one asset in the inventory. The icons on the left, if I roll over them, for any one asset record, this is showing me which sources contributed a record to this asset. So all of these assets on the first page have records, a record from AD and Meraki and Forescout and so on. Now, if I open one of these up right here, what this is showing you is, for this record at the top row, it started out as these 8 or 9 individual records. And this over here is what Axonius had to work with to do that correlation. So we've got host names, everything seemed to have the right host portion. Some of them had a fully qualified domain name, some didn't. When we look at the MACs, I see most things have the MAC, but there's a couple of gaps. Like I said, some tools just don't track that. And we got lucky here, everything had the IP. When I look at customer data, I actually tend to see gaps in all of these columns. Some things have the host and some don't, some have the IP and some don't. And that's the challenge, right? If you don't have perfect data, and let me just, spoiler alert, you don't have perfect data. In fact, a lot of places have some really, ugly, messy data. Axonius is able to work with that and bring it together. And the reason is because it's not going to take any one of these columns and say, that's what I'm correlating on. Axonius is going to use all of these 3 columns I pointed out and other things that it has access to in order to make the determination that that's all the same asset. And that's why that's the heavy lift. So anyway, these icons are really another way to look at this is showing you the result of correlation at a high level. Now, if I dig into one of these assets, what do we have access to? We have access actually to everything that we got from those sources. So here on the adapter connections page, I can see a page of information that I got from Meraki. And here's a page of information from Forescout, McAfee, AD. It's all right here at my fingertips. I can always trace back and figure out where did I learn that nugget of information, which source. If I were to put all of these source records together and make one master everything I know about this asset, that's this aggregated tab. And so everything put together, and here on the basic info page, you have things like host name, and I've got all this OS information. And then down the left side here, if I want to find other stuff, what are my agents and versions that are running on this? Well, here they are. What's the network interface that's available? That's on here as well. Lists of installed software and so on. Now, the reason I showed this to you is just so that you understand everything that I have, every field here on the aggregated page, every field you saw on the individual adapter pages is something I can use in that query wizard. So far, the only thing you saw me use was OS type, but we're just scratching the surface here. So let's do some more queries and find stuff. First thing we did was we looked for Windows. Now, something you should know is that your source tools probably have, years worth of data. You can control how much data we pull from the source. We default to 90 days, but we could do more or less. And I know that I've pulled at least 90 days for my tools. So something I might want to focus more on is how many things are actually active in my network in the more near term. So let's look at what's been last seen. And let's use something like the last, excuse me, 3 days. And my 22,000 dropped down to 20,763. This represents really what's active on my network now, near term. Why does this matter? Well, what if you had to negotiate or renegotiate, renew a contract for some software, some seat license, and they charge you for a tier for how many Windows hosts you have? This is a number you want to know, and you want to, be able to justify it. Maybe you paid for 30,000 last year, but how can you demonstrate and prove to the vendor, you should only charge me for 20,700 this year? You can do that now because you've got a way to query and prove that to them. And that last seen field, this is really key. Actually, both of these fields, let me point something out. When I asked about the OS type and the last seen, I didn't say, tell me from the viewpoint of Active Directory or Tenable or Forescout. I could have come in here and said, only use that source. But what I used was the Axonius aggregated record, which you can see from the check marks here, checked against every source. So when I looked for OS type equals Windows, it kind of didn't matter who had the answer. Like most things have it, but if anything didn't, it wouldn't matter because we'd get it from the ones that do know it. And with the last seen, when I care about last seen, the reason I'm asking is I want to know if it's on the network or not. And I don't have to know that from the viewpoint of one tool. So here's what I mean. If I open up last seen on this first one, well, these first couple of tools saw this thing in the last day. A couple things saw it a day later, this one down here hasn't seen it for 83 days. That doesn't matter. In fact, if I had keyed off of Tenable SC, I probably would have filtered that out. But these tools up here are telling me that they've seen it more recently. So there's real power. It's real ease yet power in being able to use the Axonius aggregated record when it makes sense. Now let's take this up a notch. I use McAfee as an agent on my systems. So it's also easy for me to say, okay, of those Windows hosts, how many have a McAfee ID? And the answer is 20,666. Well, McAfee can tell me that. But I know of the existence of these systems, not because of McAfee, but because of everything else. So where the real strength in Axonius is now being able to click the not on that last condition. And this got me to 94 active Windows hosts that do not have my McAfee agent. And that's the first real security gap that we've uncovered. Where should my agent be that it is not, right? You've probably heard me ask that twice already. So what does an Axonius customer do at this point? First thing you do is save this query, right? I'm going to call it info-ccon McAfee. I'm going to spell it crazy. So now that I've saved that query, it's here in my list of saved queries. I can recall this anytime in the future because this is not a one-time thing. Just like we said, you had to redo your inventory from time to time. I can run this anytime in the future. But that leads me to the third thing we do. Remember, we do three things. The first is we build a credible inventory. We do that, or you do that, by connecting the adapters. Second thing is discover coverage gap. I did that with the query wizard and these saved queries. The third thing is take the action of your choosing. So over here in the enforcement center, we build what we call enforcement sets. And I'm just gonna modify one here. So an enforcement set starts from a trigger. Here I already had one that said assets missing an agent, but the trigger is whatever saved query you want. So let's use info-ccon McAfee, the one I just created. And I know that query is going to go look for active Windows hosts that don't have the McAfee agent. I can choose to put this on a schedule, every discovery cycle, that's the 12-hour cycle, every certain day, week, whatever. So now I'm telling it what to look for, how often to do that. Then when you get results, here's the list of actions to choose from to take. We've got a bunch of choices here under notify. Send an email to the McAfee administrator, maybe, okay? Send to syslog where a SIM tool might pick it up. Send it to a webhook where a SOAR tool might pick it up, like Phantom or Demisto. Send it to a Slack channel where we've got some other bot over there waiting to do something. So a lot of choices just within the notify operations. I could also create a ticket in a ticketing system. So ServiceNow is certainly very popular, but all of these are names that our customers are using. And now I can create a ticket and leverage that existing process where the ticket gets assigned to somebody and they make sure it gets done, in short order. So all of these actions are possible. Bunch of other actions I have here for different use cases, right? My use case right now is there's a gap, there's things missing in agent. So those ones made the most sense. But I've got the ability to tag things here within Axonius, and then later I can say, give me everything with the tag or give me everything without the tag and things like that. I've got the ability to use external services to enrich data. So if I find things with a public IP address, I might want to go out to Shodan and see, does Shodan have any information about these assets? As an example, have I been pwned, right? Show me the list of users from my domain that are listed in a breach on have I been pwned? And then I can do things like compare that to when did they change their password? Is the breach date newer than the password change date? I can do all that. You remember I looked for McAfee, not there. I could have just as easily said, show me the ones that don't have Tenable as my scanner. And then I could come in here and say, add those IPs to the Tenable configuration so that they now get scanned next time. So I've fully automated looking for that gap and taking the action that's gonna close the gap. Okay, let's go back to devices. How are we on time? 15 minutes. So that was an example of things that are missing the agent. I could just as easily take this in a similar direction, but this time I'm going to say, show me and I'm going to use that last scene field again, but I'm going to use McAfee's version of that last scene. And something like this. Windows hosts, I'll run the search and then I'll bring it back. These are active Windows hosts. They do have the McAfee agent. So at one point in time, it was communicating to the console because that's where we got the record from. But this last line says, not seen by McAfee in the last 7 days. So it's an agent health issue. Like this agent has either been misconfigured, maybe it's broken, maybe it's been disabled by the users. I've seen that happen before. And to prove what I'm talking about, if I look at the last scene again, these things have been seen on the network by, AD and other things in the last couple of days, but for whatever reason, McAfee hasn't seen it in a week. And I know McAfee, right? They're gonna, I think they have daily updates, certainly every 2 or 3 days. It's rare that they go 7 without an update. And I mean, if 7's not the number, I could change it to 10, but the point remains the same. I've uncovered something that I think is a concern. And so that's we went from a McAfee coverage issue to a McAfee health issue. And just by virtue of that, what would you do? Save the query, go to the enforcement center, create another enforcement set, and make sure somebody's getting that information. So with the saved queries, and I've saved a bunch in here, right? We can save them here. We can reuse them in the enforcement center. Other place we reuse them is within dashboards. I can make dashboards to show the things that I care about. Here, I first made a dashboard, and this is just summarizing the lay of the land, if you will. So here's 2 charts on various Windows things. I got my servers, and then I got my workstation OSs. And I got the numbers of each one and a total at the bottom. I did a chart for my Linux servers by different versions. Here's a breakout of the mobile devices. Then I just did a couple of pie charts around, flavors on those themes. So this one is Windows versus Linux hosts in the environment. Total to 36,000. This next one was just how many were active in the last couple of days, 30,000. Here I did a breakout on CV, but I've got a better one of those. And then some counts of some other things down here, like show me Windows assets that are not in Active Directory. Shouldn't happen, but it does. Assets that don't have Forescout. How many virtual servers? Things with an unknown OS. I clicked into that, and what I found was these were all things that were on the Meraki Wi-Fi. And Meraki could not tell you what the OS was. So just different kinds of things in my summarization dashboard. I made another dashboard here that I called security issues. So here's that software vulnerability stuff again. I've got information on the software on these systems. I've got the vulnerability info, and I broke it out by the CVE severity. This first pie chart's pretty interesting. This is an intersection of a couple of queries. In the green, I've got any assets that don't have that McAfee EPO agent that have been seen on the network in the last 30 days. In the blue, I've got things that are not being scanned by Tenable. I don't see a Tenable record, so they're not being scanned. And right in the middle is the intersection. These 4,500 hosts do not have an agent, are not being scanned by us, by Tenable, and that represents heightened exposure and risk. So a real concerning situation there. I could even layer on top of that, show me any of these that have public IP addresses, okay? Or even things that public IP address and firewall rules allow inbound access. I've got queries around that. So that's it for that part. Oh, here we go. Has public IP and ingress accessible? That's a concern. Now this one doesn't layer in, doesn't ask about the agents on it, but I could do that. So assets not scanned and so on. So that's the dashboards. You can create as many dashboards. I've got another one here I called an executive dashboard, and just giving the, some of the same charts you've already seen, but I put them on here in a separate dashboard because the next place we go is reports, and reports can leverage those dashboards. So in the monthly executive report, what do? I give them the executive dashboard, right? And then I made some other reports, weekly asset summary, daily security report, daily unmanaged. These are leveraging a couple of things. One is the dashboards you already saw, and the other is I can take the results of any saved query and make it part of the report. Last thing I probably want to talk about is this piece called cloud compliance. This is a layer we've added. And so hopefully you're familiar with the Center for Internet Security and their top 20 critical security controls, right? These are the controls that every organization should hope to achieve. Amazon took that and built their own benchmark to say, for the cloud-based, AWS-based assets, how do you align to those CIS controls? And we have it for Azure as well. So if you're in Amazon or Azure, we can now show you how do your cloud-based assets line up to those CIS controls. We've got the section of the CIS listed here and a little bit of information on the rule. At any one of these, you can click in and see, what does this thing talk about? Description, remediation steps, what are the results? I can see which of my assets in the cloud were affected by this. And I can even pull in that the enforcement center to say, take that list of assets and then go take this enforcement action with that information. So it's helping address that, that uncertainty and that that uneasiness that some people have. Like, when I move things to the cloud, how do I know that it's getting the same level of security and visibility as my on-prem instances? And so once Amazon, built their benchmark, it was easy enough for Axonius to say, okay, we'll take yours and align it to what we know from the assets in the cloud. Bada bing, bada boom, here you go. So Allison, have any questions been posed online?
No, Drew, we don't have any questions there in the chat, but if you are ready for questions, people can unmute themselves and start bringing up any discourse they want to address.
Yeah, absolutely. If not, I'll just start. I'll keep doing, going through my my queries.
Does anybody in the chat have any questions?
Okay, while you think about that, as we were picking up devices from the various sources, we also pick up user information. So Active Directory certainly has some. If we had some other sources like Identity Solutions, Duo, Okta, those would show up here as well. Sometimes I get these from, Intune AD or what's the other one I'm thinking of? Oh, ServiceNow, because people are submitting tickets in ServiceNow. So if we're pulling in that data, we'll get user data from that. Everything that you saw me do on the devices page with a query wizard, there's very similar actions I can take over here on the user page. So I can come in here and look through fields. In this case, it's all AD data, but who is admin of my 25,000? Here's the 129 admins, and I can, compare and contrast and find things here. I don't think I have any particularly compelling saved queries on this one. I have a different instance than where I do. Now back to my saved queries, since we have time. Okay. We talked about this, missing Tenable. It's just as easy as, does it, is it not seen by Tenable? And then I threw in seen in the last few days. So, undo this. These are the ones that Tenable has, but we can see there's no Tenable icon over here. So that was 7,700 things. And that'd be a really easy use case to give that to the enforcement center and then get those things added in. The other query I had over here that's pretty interesting was this one. So with AWS, we can see the firewall rules within AWS. And these 67 devices, let me show you the query. So AWS ID exists. These are AWS Cloud assets. I made sure that they were things that were seen only by AWS. That alone is concerning, because if I want them to be scanned, if I want agents on my tools, whatever, that's showing me ones that when I only see one icon, I get concerned because this is the only tool that knows about it. Within this data set, I said, show me the ones with public IPs. And then we got into a complex object. I said, show me the ones with the firewall rules where it's equal to allow inbound access. And so put all together, these 67 represent quite an exposure. Public facing assets, they're allowing inbound and they don't have any security, measures on them that I've added above whatever, Amazon might be doing. So I found that to be a pretty compelling query right there. Outside of that, I will say all of our documentation is online, and some customers find this really appealing. We can come in here and go to docs.axonius.com and get information about all that whole long adapter list that I talked about. So you can see what things we work with and what kind of information would be required for us to connect to the different tools. On top of that, we got information about what it's going to take to deploy, what our architecture looks like. So, very friendly and open. You don't have to create an account or give us any information to get to this. Axonius is very willing to, freely share this. If you want information on the use cases, some of the ones I talked about are in here, and there's additional ones in here. CMDB is a great one. A lot of companies have a CMDB, which they hoped would be their single source of truth. But what they found out was it's largely, in the customers I've talked to, it's been updated by humans is the easiest way to put it. Somebody has to go put records there, and for whatever reason things get deployed, they don't make it into the CMDB. What Axonius can do is, if your CMDB was, say, in ServiceNow, we have an adapter, we can pull all of that CMDB data in. Now we see what ServiceNow knows about. We also see, just like anything else, all the other things that don't have a record originating from ServiceNow. Meaning, here's all the assets your CMDB doesn't know about. Now in the enforcement center, my enforcement center action is give these records to ServiceNow, and we're going to make that CMDB better than it was when we got here. We're going to update it automatically. Okay, yep, finding short-lived ephemeral devices, finding unsanctioned software, all of these actions are in there. So we have a virtual booth in the exhibitor hall. You can go there and click, and I think you can request the demo and more information from Axonius. We'd love to get in and talk to you. We'll give you a more comprehensive demo than this. And ideally, if this is a project that you're looking for, we fully entertain POCs, so proof of concept. And I learned today that we've never lost to a competitor when we've got to the proof of concept stage. So I don't think there's no competitors that really do what Axonius does. There's companies that try to compete, but once we go to the POC, Axonius wins hands down. But I'd love for you to figure that out, find that out for yourself. So Allison, I think that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. This was a wonderful presentation. I would also like to offer your virtual room or virtual booth to the attendees if they want to link up with you and ask you any questions they didn't get the chance to, and also direct you guys. There is a survey pertaining to this presentation. Drew, thank you so much. And guys, definitely reach out to Drew and gain some more from his knowledge.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.